The rain in Lagos was never just rain. It was a heavy, rhythmic percussion against the rusted roof of the minibus. Nadia Okoye clutched her plastic bag, her knuckles white. As she stepped onto the asphalt of the Emerald Coast estate, the silence was jarring. Here, the air didn't smell of diesel and fried plantains. It smelled of wet jasmine and expensive security. She stood before the K. Adeyemi plaque. To the world, Cade Adeyemi was a fallen titan, the tech genius who had once graced every magazine cover until the Victoria Bridge accident turned him into a ghost. To Nadia, he was a paycheck that would keep her brother Tariq in school. The gate groaned open. The security guard's eyes were like flint. "Don't wander," he warned. As Nadia walked up the winding driveway, the mansion loomed like a limestone giant. It was beautiful, but it felt like a tomb. Inside, the opulence was suffocating. Chandeliers hung like frozen tears. Madame Bisi, the housekeeper, met her with a gaze that could peel paint. "You are here for Lena," she said, her voice a low rasp. "The child hasn't spoken since the funeral. She is a broken thing. Do not break her further." Bisi leaned in, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And stay away from the master. He lives in the shadows for a reason. Do not look at him, do not speak to him, and do not think you are anything more than the help." Nadia nodded, her heart hammering. That night, her staff room felt like a palace compared to her shack in Makiri, but the silence of the house was louder than any Lagos traffic. Somewhere in the dark, she heard a door click shut. The master was awake. The morning sun hit the marble floors with a clinical brightness. Nadia found Lena in a room that looked like a toy store, yet the air felt stagnant. The 5-year-old sat by the window, her eyes fixed on a distant point on the horizon. She held a teddy bear with such force, her small fingernails were white. "Hello, Lena, I'm Nadia," she whispered. Silence. Nadia didn't try to force a conversation. She knew what it was like to want to disappear. Instead, she sat on the floor and began to organize a scattered set of wooden blocks. As she worked, she began to hum a low, vibrating melody, an old Igbo lullaby her mother used to sing when the world felt too big. For an hour, nothing happened. Then, a soft tap, tap, tap. Lena's index finger was drumming against the bear's velvet ear, perfectly in time with Nadia's song. Nadia's breath hitched, but she didn't stop humming. It was the first sign of life in a house of statues. Suddenly, a shadow darkened the doorway. Nadia looked up and froze. A man sat in a high-tech wheelchair, his shoulders broad enough to fill the frame. His face, once the pride of the tech world, was a mask of cold indifference, though his eyes burned with a restless, tortured energy. "Who told you to sing?" Cade Adeyemi asked. His voice was like gravel over silk. I thought it might help, sir," Nadia stammered, standing up. Cade looked at his niece, then back at Nadia. His gaze was so intense she felt it on her skin. "This is a house of mourning, Miss Okoye, not a concert hall. Keep your noise to yourself." He spun the chair around with practiced violent grace and disappeared back into the gloom. Sleep was an impossible luxury. Nadia found herself wandering the darkened halls at 2 a.m., driven by a thirst that felt like sandpaper in her throat. As she neared the grand foyer, a sound stopped her cold. It was a piano. The notes weren't just being played, they were being bled onto the keys. It was a composition of pure, unadulterated grief, slow, haunting, and dissonant. Nadia followed the sound to the music room, where the moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor. Cade sat at the grand piano. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. Now his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, making him look human, vulnerable, and devastatingly handsome. He played with a ferocity that made the strings ache. Nadia stepped onto a creaky floorboard. The music snapped shut. "Spies usually hide better," Cade said, without turning. "I wasn't spying, I was listening. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, sir." He turned his chair, the wheels whispering against the rug. "Beauty is a lie people tell themselves to forget the ugliness of reality. You are here to watch a child, not to critique my failures." "Is that what you think the music is? A failure?" Nadia's jaw tightened. "I am a man who built empires and now cannot even feel my own legs. My music is a funeral march for the man I used to be. Go back to your room, Nadia. Don't come looking for things you're not meant to find." She fled, but the image of his lonely silhouette stayed burned into her mind. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a prisoner in a golden cage of his own making. The Harmattan winds began to blow, coating the Emerald Coast in a fine layer of dust. Inside the mansion, however, the ice was beginning to melt. Lena had started following Nadia like a shadow. She still hadn't spoken, but she would tug on Nadia's skirt when she wanted to go to the garden. One afternoon, while they were painting, Lena dipped her hand in bright yellow acrylic and pressed it onto Nadia's cheek. Nadia gasped, then burst into a genuine, melodious laugh. Lena's eyes widened, and a tiny, shy dimple appeared on her left cheek. From the balcony above, Cade watched them. He held a glass of scotch, his expression unreadable. He had spent millions on therapists and specialists, yet this girl from a village he couldn't find on a map had elicited a smile from Lena in 3 weeks. He found himself descending the elevator more often. He would coincidentally be in the library when they were reading, or in the dining hall when they were having tea. "She seems better," Cade said one evening as Nadia walked Lena to bed. "She's brave," Nadia replied softly. "She's just waiting for someone to show her that the world is still safe." Cade looked down at his useless legs. "The world is never safe, Nadia. It's just a series of accidents waiting to happen." "Maybe," Nadia said, stepping closer, "but there are also miracles waiting to happen. You just have to be willing to see them." For the first time, Cade didn't look away. The air between them hummed with a different kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with employer and employee, and everything to do with two souls recognizing each other's scars. A thunderstorm turned the sky a bruised purple. Nadia was finishing her chores when she heard a sickening thud, followed by the sound of breaking glass coming from the master wing. She ran, ignoring BC's rules. She found Cade on the floor of his study. He had tried to reach a book on a high shelf, and his wheelchair had tipped. His face was pressed against the cold marble, and his breathing was jagged. "Sir, don't move," Nadia cried, dropping to her knees beside him. "Get out," he roared, though his voice lacked his usual power. "I said, get out. Don't look at me like this." "I'm not looking at a billionaire," Nadia said firmly, putting her hands on his shoulders. "I'm looking at a man who needs a hand. Let me help you." "I am half a man," he hissed, tears of frustration finally breaking through his stony facade. Nadia didn't flinch. She used her strength, the strength of a woman who had carried water jugs for miles and worked fields since she was 10, to help him sit up. She didn't let go even when he was steady. "You are not small, Cade," she whispered, using his name for the first time. "And right now, you are not alone." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy with the realization that the wall between them had finally crumbled. Cade reached out, his hand trembling, and brushed a stray hair from her forehead. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then he looked away, his voice thick. "Thank you. Now, please, help me back into the chair." Just as the house began to feel like a home, the past arrived in a sleek black Bentley. Vanessa Cole stepped out of the car like a predatory cat. She was the woman who had been on Cade's arm during his rise, and the woman who had vanished the moment the doctors said he'd never walk again. She was draped in silk and diamonds, her smile as sharp as a razor. "Cade, darling," she purred, walking into the foyer as if she still owned it. "I've been so miserable. I realized my mistake. I never stopped loving you." Nadia stood in the shadows, holding Lena's hand. She felt a sudden, sharp pang of jealousy that tasted like ash. Vanessa was everything Nadia was not: sophisticated, wealthy, and part of Cade's world. "Vanessa," Cade said, his voice guarded, "you've been gone for 2 years." "I was grieving. I couldn't handle seeing you in pain." Vanessa lied smoothly, her eyes darting around the room, landing on Nadia with pure disdain. "And who is this? The help?" Cade hesitated. "This is Nadia, Lena's nanny." Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How charming. A little village girl to play house with." That night, Nadia couldn't sleep. She stayed up late, restless, and caught the sound of voices in the garden. She crept to the window. Vanessa was on the phone, her voice no longer sweet. "He's pathetic, but he's still got the shares. I'll play the devoted fiancé for a month, get him to sign the merger, and then we sell the estate and leave him to rot. He won't even see it coming." Nadia's blood ran cold. She had to tell him. The next morning, Nadia cornered Cade in his office. "Sir, I need to speak with you about Miss Cole. I heard her on the phone. She's only here for the company shares. She doesn't love you." Cade's expression darkened instantly. "Nadia, be careful. Vanessa and I have a long history." "She's planning to betray you. She said she'd leave you to rot." "Enough." Cade slammed his hand on his desk. "Is this what this is? You think because I let you help me off the floor, you can dictate my personal life? You are a nanny, Nadia. Know your place." Nadia felt as if he had slapped her. Before she could respond, Vanessa walked in, looking distraught. "Cade, my diamond bracelet is missing, the one my mother gave me. I left it on the vanity and now it's gone." Vanessa turned her icy gaze toward Nadia. "I saw her coming out of my room earlier." "I was never in your room," Nadia cried. "Search her bag," Vanessa demanded. Cade looked pained, but he nodded to Madame BC, who had appeared in the doorway. BC went to the staff room and returned moments later, holding the faded Ankara bag. She reached inside and pulled out a glittering diamond bracelet hidden in the folds of Nadia's spare dress. "Nadia," Cade's voice was hollow, filled with a disappointment that hurt worse than his anger. "I didn't do it. She planted it," Nadia pleaded. "Get out," Cade said, his eyes turning back into flint. "I want you off this estate in 10 minutes. If I see you again, I'll call the police." The rain was back, a torrential downpour that blurred the world. Nadia clutched her bag, now containing the bracelet Vanessa used to ruin her, and walked toward the gates. She didn't have the money for a bus back to McKeary. She had nothing. As she reached the heavy iron gates, a high-pitched scream pierced through the sound of the storm. "Auntie Nadia, no!" The world seemed to stop. Cade, who was watching from the porch in his chair, froze. Vanessa stopped smirking. Madame BC dropped the tray she was holding. Lena was running down the driveway, her small shoes splashing in the puddles. She was crying, her face contorted with grief that had finally found its voice. "Auntie Nadia, please don't go. Don't leave me." Lena reached Nadia and threw her arms around her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The child, who hadn't spoken a word in 2 years, was screaming for the woman they had just branded a thief. Nadia knelt in the mud, hugging the girl. "I'm so sorry, Lena. I'm so sorry." Cade watched from a distance, his heart fracturing. He knew Lena. He knew his niece didn't lie. She wouldn't cry like this for a thief. He looked at Vanessa, who was looking at her fingernails, bored by the theatrics. For the first time, the scales fell from his eyes. But he had already given the order. The guards pulled Nadia away. The gate shut with a final metallic clang, leaving Nadia on the street and Lena screaming behind the bars. 3 days passed. Nadia found shelter in a dilapidated church on the outskirts of the city, scrubbing floors for a bowl of soup. Her heart was at the mansion. Back at the Adeyemi residence, the house was a war zone. Lena had stopped eating. She had developed a raging fever that the doctors couldn't explain. She lay in her bed, her skin burning, whispering one name over and over. Nadia, Nadia. Cade sat by her bed, the image of a broken man. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. "She needs her, Cade," Madame Bisi said softly, standing in the doorway. "And you know in your heart that girl didn't take that bracelet. She spent every kobo she earned on her brother's school fees. Why would she steal a diamond she couldn't sell?" Cade looked at the laptop on his desk. He had spent the last 48 hours doing what he did best, hacking. He had accessed the security footage Vanessa thought she had deleted. He saw it all. Vanessa entering the staff room, planting the jewelry, and smiling at the camera she thought was off. He also saw the recording of Vanessa's phone call on the balcony. His blood turned to ice. He had thrown away the only person who truly cared for his family for a woman who saw him as a bank account. "Bisi," Cade said, his voice cold and lethal. "Call the police. I have a guest who needs to be escorted out. And then find out where the minibus from Makiri drops off its passengers." The neighborhood of Makiri was a maze of mud and desperation. Cade's modified SUV bounced over potholes that could swallow a small car. He had his driver stop at every corner. "Have you seen this woman?" He held up a photo of Nadia he had taken from the employee files. People shook their heads. They looked at the expensive car with suspicion. Cade felt the weight of his own privilege. He had lived in a tower while people like Nadia fought for every breath. Finally, a young boy, Tariq, recognized the photo. "That's my sister. Is she in trouble? Did she lose her job?" Cade looked at the boy's torn sleeves and felt a surge of guilt. "No, son, she's the hero. Where is she?" Tariq led them to the church. Cade rolled his chair through the dim, drafty hall. He found Nadia in the back, sleeping on a wooden pew, her Ankara dress stained and wrinkled. She woke up as his chair approached. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "I didn't steal it, Mr. Adeyemi." "I know," Cade whispered. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was cold from the rain, but his touch was desperate. "Lena is sick, Nadia. She's calling for you. She won't survive another night without you." Nadia looked at his expensive suit, now ruined by the rain, and his eyes, which were finally stripped of their pride. "And what about you, Cade? Why are you here?" Cade swallowed hard. "I'm a man who was blind, and I'm asking for a second chance to see." The return to the mansion was a blur of speed and sirens. When Nadia burst into Lena's room, the air felt thick with the scent of sickness. "I'm here, baby. Auntie is here," Nadia cried, pulling the small, burning body into her arms. Lena's eyes fluttered open. The moment she recognized Nadia's scent, the smell of lavender and soap, her breathing stabilized. The tension left her tiny frame. Within an hour, the fever began to break. Cade watched from the doorway. He saw Nadia stay up all night, sponging the child's forehead and singing the lullaby. He saw the way she didn't care about the marble floors or the chandeliers. She only cared about the life inside them. Over the next week, the mansion transformed. The heavy curtains were pulled back. Music, not the funeral marches, but jazz and highlife, filled the halls. Cade started his physical therapy again, with a ferocity he hadn't shown in years. He realized that while he might never run, he still had a life worth living. He began to work on his company again, but this time he focused on tech that would help people with disabilities. He and Nadia spent their evenings in the library. They didn't talk about employee contracts. They talked about Tariq's dreams, Nadia's love of poetry, and Cade's fear of the dark. "I spent so long thinking I was a ghost. I forgot that ghosts can't feel the sun. You brought the sun back, Nadia," he told her one night over tea. A month later, the Emerald Coast was in full bloom. The scandal of Vanessa Cole had faded from the headlines, replaced by the news of Kareem Adewale's miraculous return to the business world. Nadia was in the garden, helping Lena plant sunflowers. She felt a sense of peace she had never known. Tariq was now enrolled in one of the best schools in Lagos, and her family was safe. But her heart was restless. She knew her time as a nanny was technically over. Lena was thriving and back in school. "Nadia," Kate's voice called out. He was in the garden, looking at a patch of roses. He looked stronger, his face full of color. "I have a confession," he said as she approached. "When I first saw you, I thought you were just another person who wanted something from me. Everyone always does." "I only wanted to save my brother," Nadia said honestly. "And you saved me instead," Cade replied. He looked down at his hands. "I know I am a difficult man. I know I have a long way to go before I can be the man you deserve. I may never walk through this garden with you." "I don't need a man who walks," Nadia said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I need a man who stays." Cade reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not a flash of diamonds like Vanessa's, but a simple, elegant emerald the color of the coast. "I don't want you to be the nanny anymore, Nadia. I want you to be the heart of this home. Will you marry me?" Nadia looked at Lena, who was grinning and holding a handful of dirt, then back at Cade. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. The wedding was not a massive socialite event in a 5-star hotel. It was held in the very garden where they had found their way back to each other. Nadia wore a dress of white lace and traditional Ankara silk, a bridge between her two worlds. Tariq stood proudly as Cade's best man, looking sharp in a tiny suit. Madame BC wiped her eyes with her wrapper, finally allowing a smile to grace her stern face. As the vows were exchanged, Lena stood between them, holding both their hands. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Cade didn't just kiss his bride. He pulled her close and whispered, "We're going to be okay." The reception was filled with laughter and the smell of jollof rice and expensive champagne. Cade sat in his chair, but he had never looked taller. He watched Nadia dance with her brother, her laughter ringing out across the Emerald Coast. That night, as the guests left and the house grew quiet, it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. The chandeliers didn't look like frozen tears. They looked like stars. Nadia stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. She remembered the girl who had stepped off that rattling minibus with nothing but a plastic bag and a dream. She had come looking for a job, but she had found a family. Cade rolled up beside her, taking her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking that the rain finally stopped," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in many years, the house that once held so much grief finally felt like a home. The billionaire and the nanny had found their miracle, and the silent child was finally singing.
If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, teach, and entertain. Until next time, bye!